Hello and welcome to the Women at the Top podcast interview series. My name is Regina Barr, and I am the founder of the Women at the Top Network, and I'll be your host today. Joining me today is author Manisha Dhawan, and she is a speaker, author, executive facilitator, and executive coach with over 20 years of work experience across a multitude of roles and industries. She holds a BS in chemistry, very impressive, I might add, and an MBA from UC Irvine. Manisha spent over a decade at organizations including PricewaterhouseCoopers, Deloitte, Slalom, and Taco Bell headquarters, leading global transformation initiatives, innovation, and strategic change initiatives. In her book, The Digital Agile Leader, she shares stories and strategies on how to be an effective leader and navigate change in the workplace and beyond. So, welcome to our show today.
Thank you, Regina. Thanks for having me.
It's very nice to be here. And I do have a copy of the book for people who are
Ah,
wondering what
wonderful.
it
Yes.
looks like. And I think it's a very, very timely topic. So excited to have the opportunity to speak with you. So the book focuses on leadership, and we always like to get the backstory on what motivated you to write this book and to write it at this time. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I really appreciate the introduction. So as you've seen, I've worked in many roles in many industries. In fact, I watched my father, an entrepreneur, start a company from the ground up in our garage when I was just a toddler. And the company's still in operation today. I'm actually working there now as well in manufacturing. And so I've seen him go through ups and downs as an entrepreneur, as a leader, as someone, driving growth and building something. And then when I left the family business for a short term, and then I eventually came back, uh, I saw so many eye-opening things about how leaders and teams function. I saw kind of what I like to call, the dark side of leadership, where our ego gets a hold of us, where there's a lot of pressure at the top, the challenges that leaders face, the difficult decisions that they have to make, especially in like public companies. And I was part of the teams that, sometimes there was chaos and dysfunction, and yet we still had to meet some really aggressive goals. So through my experiences and talking to others, and even the challenges that I faced and setbacks I faced in those environments, I really learned for me what it means to be, a forward thinking leader, someone that is, looking behind the corners and being strategic, bringing others along. And when leaders acted with that lens, they would drive results. Some of the other leaders might get short-term results, but
Hmm.
ultimately what happened was people felt demotivated, burnt out, and eventually either left or the projects would fall behind. So I think the roles that leaders play, as well as a team collectively, is so pivotal. And if we are to see organizations thrive and meet their goals, it really is an important topic. So that's what kind of drove me to write my book.
Wonderful. It's nice that you have such a broad array of experience because you can bring all of that to the table in this book and in the work that you're doing. So I love that you've got that depth of background, and having worked with a variety of companies, large and I suspect some small ones along the way too there. So I recently wrote an article titled Fast Track Your Team's Success in 3 Easy Steps. And I talk about some simple and powerful strategies that leaders should possess to help their teams reach their full potential. So tell us, in the spirit of the digital agile leader, what traits does a digital agile leader have, and why is that so important in today's work environment?
Yeah, and I read your article, Regina, and I think we kind of overlapped on some of the traits and principles that we see as pivotal for leaders. For example, empowering your team to make decisions, inspect what you expect. I believe that was one of them as well. So I do talk a lot about the art of delegating work. And, I've seen some leaders fly really, really high above the ground and just kind of delegate and then leave and go work on something else. And then before we know it, the work's kind of gone off track. So kind of being still in the loop of the work that's being delegated. I talk about a lot about emotional intelligence and
Yes.
interpersonal relationship skills. to motivate others and to create a culture on the team. By the way, it's not just the leader's responsibility to do that, of course, but they can champion and model the culture. So that's really important as well. And then co-creating, the environment and career paths for others. So I believe it's the employee's responsibility to also drive and own their career, but sometimes they don't know what's available to them. Sometimes they're working under a territorial manager that won't let them out of their sight.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think a good leader will sit with them and kind of understand what their longer term goals are, how that ladders up to the larger purpose of the organization so that they feel more like connected and aligned with their mission and their purpose. And that can create a sense of belonging and just a sense of overall well-being. Also, when we think about wellness and well-being, certainly leaders are at risk, and all of us, for overworking, for burnout. So taking that time to reflect and pause and take breaks to then re-energize, recharge, and then go at it again.
Yes, and I'm glad you brought up the well-being, and because I do think that the leader sets the stage for all of the employees, and very often the leaders don't take care of themselves, and so that then sets an expectation, and not necessarily a positive expectation. I think the days of burning yourself down into the ground are over and done. I think especially many of our younger up and coming leaders, they want more of a balance in their lives. So I appreciate that you um, reflect upon that and encourage the leaders that you work with to do the same. So you've got tools. I like having tools and checklists and all those kinds of good things. And in your book, you talk about something called your agility matrix tool. So this is kind of a unique concept, and I would love for you to tell us what it is and how you came up with it.
Yeah, thanks for asking. It's a funny story. So yeah, the agility matrix is a tool that I devised. Actually, the origins start with like a funny, silly childhood nickname I had, and you know, just like many of us in life, we had obstacles. So my brother would lovingly just say, you're kind of like a moose running through the forest. You get your antlers entangled and stuck in trees, and you have to find a way to clear the path. So I love that analogy. And as I was going through all my work experiences, a lot of what I did was at Deloitte was change management, technology adoption, and driving real big transformation for teams. And I'll never forget the day when someone on our team had like a visceral reaction to change. She was really, really upset that we were about to disrupt her entire job and the way that she had been functioning and working for so many years. What she was familiar and comfortable with was about to be completely disrupted. So, to the shock of all of us in the room, she took her shoe off and threw it across the room, and it hit the wall. And we just sat there and stunned for a minute when we gathered ourselves. She left the room, but later on, she confessed she was scared and terrified about change and what that meant. She had been laid off in her prior job when when technology was implemented there. So it's very natural to feel scared and nervous.
Mhm.
So over time, I started observing these patterns and behaviors in people and even in myself when it came to change. And I found there were 4 common categories or themes in terms of how we respond to change. And so I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to incorporate this in sort of an archetype fashion,
Mhm.
leveraging, the archetype of the moose as one of those change responses, someone that wants to drive change or wants to move forward, but is getting stuck, maybe running into obstacles. Maybe they don't have the resources or the skills or the training. So that
Mhm.
was one archetype. And then the 3 others I can go through as well. So the coyote, if you think of a coyote, is very adaptable. It's a very adaptable animal. It's been able to thrive in deserts and cities and mountains. So when I think of a coyote, this is somebody that loves to lead change. They're often the first people to dive into change. They like innovation. They're kind of excited about it. So that's the personification of that characteristic of somebody, how they respond to change. Now, there's advantages and disadvantages to every archetype. So if a
Mhm.
coyote moves too far too fast, they could leave others behind or miss important details. Same with the moose. Sometimes if they get too stuck, For a while, what happens is they can kind of move into the next phase, which is the ostrich. So the ostrich is the third one in the matrix, third animal. And as you can imagine, the proverbial ostrich might put their head in the sand. They're not ready to face change. They're very overwhelmed by change, so they retreat, they avoid, they deny. These are coping mechanisms and sometimes survival mechanisms. Again, there's no judgment, there's no right or wrong. It's just a matter of looking in a mirror and reflecting, how am I responding to change? Is this helping me and my team? Is it holding me back from my career and my goals? So somebody's got their head in the sand, they're just not ready. But over time, maybe they can sort of lift their head up and look around and say, wow, something's really changing and maybe I need to get on board or at least get curious and learn a little bit about it. So
Yeah.
that brings me to the fourth animal, and that's the bear. The bear is moving a little bit slowly, cautiously, but they're curious. They want data before proceeding. They don't dive head first. And that's how they look at change. There's a couple other animal archetypes, but these are the four main ones. And
Mm-hmm.
I've noticed in teams, if we kind of have a blend of them, it functions pretty well. But if you have a team of all coyotes racing to the finish line, we might be tripping over ourselves and missing something important. So then you kind of need the bear to anchor us in, or look around and say, where are we getting stuck? Why are there project delays? How can we enlist the support of others? So for me, it was really important to build this self-reflection tool first and foremost, not to put us in boxes or label us,
Right.
but more as a mirror to reflect.
Yeah, I think, and it provides also a means for people to communicate and dialogue with each other, and also to do it in kind of a fun way. I love the animal archetypes that you've talked about, and I think everyone can relate to them. Everyone can. I literally had a moose experience, and I can tell you, was in the Boundary Water canoe area, and yeah, it's just funny, and how the moose was racing through the trees and collecting all the branches and things, scared the living daylights out of me. And I screamed bloody murder and scared all the people that were with me on that trip, because we weren't all together. And my husband heard me out on the lake, came racing in. A friend came running in from a peninsula. I didn't get hurt or anything. I just got scared because I was startled. So anyway, love the
A real live moose
archetypes.
encounter.
Yes.
Wow.
How many people get to say that? And I would like not to have one like that
Yeah,
again in this lifetime.
I don't
So
blame you.
we are in a world of constant change. I used to joke around, and my dad used to joke around that, the only thing you can count on are change and taxes, right? Maybe death. Some people like to say that too. So a lot of
Which
change
is
going
strange.
on. A lot of people may or may not adapt well to change. I always like to say I love change as long as it doesn't impact me, right? And I'm like you, I've done a lot of change management. So, how does agility impact the way that people respond to change?
Mhm. Yeah, and agility is kind of a unique word. I guess everyone can define it differently. And the way I talk about it in my book is like a dancer, if you, as a metaphor, their core is stable, but if something happens, they can pivot or shift or move. So it's, I think, a mindset and a skill. And we all have different degrees of our ability to be agile. So that's part of the matrix. It's how agile are we versus how rigid are we? And that can be complex and nuanced. It might be based on our upbringing, what our views were about change, if we were traumatized by something that happened in our life, how the people around us dealt with change, if we could even talk about that, or we brushed up under the rug. So I think we do have some natural instinctive reactions to work through, but we can borrow elements from the other archetypes. So yeah, I think agility is, especially in today's changing dynamic landscape, is very critical in business and in our lives. Even with, for example, the pandemic was a big disruption, but then we have like tariffs and socioeconomic shifts and other geopolitical events happening that fundamentally can hit businesses and how they operate. And I know a lot of businesses are either downsizing their teams or thinking about, or they're in growth mode and thinking about how to scale. So if we sometimes wait too long or we get stuck, our competitors could leapfrog us, for example. We
Mhm.
might miss some opportunities. But on the other hand, if we move too fast, we could also, again, see that burnout. So I think it's a balance in contextualizing it for a particular leader and their dynamic and what they're facing. Um, but to always kind of think like, can we be more efficient? Can we pivot? Do we need to pivot right now? For example, I saw some companies right away when the tariffs hit, uh, implement price increases and tell all their customers. And then they had to kind of roll that back. So just kidding. I don't know if they rolled back their price increases, but it was almost like, just slowing down to speed up, pausing and thinking, not moving too fast, but having that agility, that flexibility, being nimble as underlying things are changing in the business and in the world.
So there's something I wanted to tap into that you also mentioned. It's kind of like the yin and yang. You said some companies might be downsizing, some companies might be scaling for growth. And some companies are actually doing both at the same time, right? So they're downsizing in certain areas and upsizing in other areas so that they can work more efficiently and grow. And so sometimes there are a lot of mixed messages that people are trying to navigate. And, if you're the person in a new area that's growing and hiring, you're still going through change, and change can be challenging whether it's positive or negative. So I think it was interesting to me that you mentioned both sides of that coin in organizations. And the other comment too is the leaders are going through the change too. So we have a lot of people who watch this podcast or listen to the podcast that are in leadership roles. So it's not just what's happening to the people. Sometimes we forget the leader goes through the change too. And
Absolutely.
sometimes we have to be kind to ourselves and take care of ourselves also through that change. So just wanted to comment on that a little bit. So you've written your book, you've worked at a variety of places. I know that you've talked with lots of leaders across a wide variety of industries. So the leaders that you've worked with, how familiar have they been with this concept of being an agile leader? And we're in working with some of the leaders you have, any aha moments?
Oh yeah, I think actually when they learn about the tool or the matrix or about even just the word agile and what it means, I'll notice that every now and then they'll say that, oh, we need to be agile. And they catch themselves in the moment. And these are leaders that maybe before were used to approaching things much more cautiously and slowly. So I think bringing that vocabulary to the forefront is key. And now I also work with companies that are all about like innovation. Let's innovate. Let's do AI. What's the next big thing? And I think we need to innovate with a sense of purpose too, and understand the ramifications and the impact of innovating. So this idea of agility, but like you mentioned earlier, like balance, the yin yang of what's going on in the organization. But I think it is helping companies realize we can't just stay stuck. We can't do things the way we've done for so long. It's a new world we're transitioning into, and that requires some level of change.
Well said. It's always interesting to see, and a great segue for our next question that I have for you is how different organizations and people adapt to change. So, some folks listening in today, and perhaps some folks that you've worked with, have done a great job of leading teams during change, and maybe some have done a less great job. No judgment, right? So, how do you hope this book impacts emerging leaders who may be just starting their journey and are going to be facing these kinds of changes along the way?
Yeah, and I think, as you mentioned, it's very, very difficult for leaders to decide what to do in the midst of all this change. And there's a lot of decision making and scenario planning. And sometimes we may make a decision that seems wrong in the moment or has certain side effects, and then you have to pivot again and be agile again. And I think we can learn the wisdom of seasoned leaders too, that maybe there's a reason why they're preserving some of the tradition in the culture, or there's a reason why things continue to stay the same to some respect because they're maybe highly regulated industries or they have to follow certain processes and procedures. So it depends on the leader and their scope of work and what they're really having to manage. But as an emerging leader, I mean, also thinking about how you can influence change and bring your fresh perspective, which can be challenging. Not everybody may be receptive to it. So you, like you said, using your communication as a tool, finding the right time, getting mentors along the way, and but not being afraid to kind of share your ideas, or at least track them and log them, and then wait for the appropriate time or with somebody that you trust. Um, I do think that organizations are looking for fresh perspectives. I would encourage people to come in and first learn everything, and again, why things are being done a certain way before causing all kinds of disruption. But slowly by slowly, if you see something, if you see areas of improvement and ways the business can be more efficient, bring that up. Look to someone again to create that safe environment, and that's up to us leaders too. So I think learn, soak it up, absorb as much as you can, and then just get excited to see what could be the possibilities, and get really specific on what you think needs to be changed and why. Learn how to articulate and communicate that, and then you'll maybe get a couple quick wins and start to feel more encouraged.
So when you think about change, I was thinking about the archetypes, and we're talking about emerging leaders right now. From your experience in working through change initiatives and with a variety of companies, a variety of leaders, a variety of team members, are there certain, um, maybe, I don't know, generational or um, different types of people, like where you see uh, either they're quickest to onboard with the change, or where they're the slowest to onboard the change, or it's just across the board?
It's kind of across the board. I remember when I first started working, I think I've always had leaned more towards a coyote. I always just kind of wanted to come in and shake things up. And sometimes it was a lesson learned that, I have to kind of respect how things were done, and slow down a little bit. But I still like to come in and disrupt. And, now I just know how to navigate it a little bit more with more finesse. And now obviously I've grown through those phases and stages. So I'm a different generation now. I mean, I'm generation Gen X. Um, so I might still kind of think like the younger generations, but you'd be surprised. I don't typically like to categorize the generations, because I was a professor at a university, and I've had students come up to me and say, you know what, I don't even know how to use my computer. Um, just because we're younger generation doesn't mean we're
Yeah.
tech savvy.
Mhm.
And I've worked with, again, more seasoned leaders, and maybe they're just used to working something in a certain way. So it might be a little bit more challenging to change, but that doesn't mean they can't.
Right.
Sometimes leaders are so busy, so they have to balance what's easy versus what's efficient. So even if I show them, like, if you use this tool, it's much easier, they said, well, what I know, it's more efficient for me.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a choice. I think it's more of across the board and an individual. Although I know, for simplicity, some people like to group generations, but I've seen exceptions in all cases.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm chuckling because I was thinking back what you were talking about earlier with delegation, and I have a motto. It's called "Delegate or Die Trying." However, when I do delegate, I recognize that I don't delegate the responsibility. But one of the things that I have discovered is very often, you talk about change. Um, Sometimes in my head, I would tell myself, well, It's it's just easier for me to do it and get it done. Nobody can do it quite the way that I did. And then when I started to delegate more um, to my team members, including my assistant, I actually found out that sometimes, no, they actually did it better, and they found more efficient ways to do it than I did. But I kind of struggled with that. Once I got over that kind of hump or that learning, then that's when my motto became delegate or die trying, and then also empowered people that worked with me. If I'm doing something that you don't think I should be doing or that you think you could do better, please let me know, because I probably will be more than happy to delegate it to you. So, you know, um, and what that brings me to also with change is it's important to have people around you. Like you said, you're a coyote, and I tend to be. I'm probably a hybrid, but I am a coyote. I'm a change maker. Um, in the DISC world, behavioral style, I'm a DI, and when I'm moving and shaking in the workplace, it's my D that's driving. Even though I'm very personable and likable and friendly and all those other things. So it's important that you surround yourself with some of the other archetypes that can help balance out your primary. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it can be situational too. So, for example, I might be a coyote at work. Maybe on some projects I get stuck like a moose, but in my personal life, sometimes I'm an ostrich, I'll be honest.
See,
Like
yeah.
this, I'm not ready to look at the reality of the situation. I'm just gonna go distract myself or focus on something else. And I kind of bury my head in the sand for a while until I'm, bit a little bit harder and have to face it.
Mhm.
So I use it as a tool for my own self-reflection. But I do think we have a primary. Yes, I do think we are kind of leaning towards our natural default state, similar to DISC, which, as you
Mhm.
know, it's kind of how you naturally
You're
gravitate towards
hardwired, yes. Mhm.
hardwire. Yeah, but you have elements of all the four types, and they can combine and to different degrees. So yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, hard to believe, but we are winding down on our time together today. So I always like to ask if you had one piece of advice for our viewers and listeners around being an agile leader, what would that be?
Mhm. I would say be compassionate with yourself and others. It's not easy to go through change. It's not easy to lead through change. So have some compassion for yourself, but also curiosity. And what if I leaned into this change? What if I tried or took one step forward? Or what if I just even asked a question? Is this change really even worth doing? And so trying to get a little bit more involved and curious, but also compassionate.
Fabulous. I think we all need to be more compassion, have more compassion for ourselves and others, especially during
And others.
change.
Oh yes.
That's all that we have time for today. So I just want to thank you for being here with us, Manisha, and a big thank you to our viewers and listeners for joining us today. See you next time.